Hello. Today we are going to pick up one of the dance forms of India, which has a very interesting history that unfolded very recently within our lifetimes. This is the dance that is called Sattriya and which received its national recognition on November 15th, the year 2000. On that day, it was brought at par with dances like Kathak, Bharatanatyam and all the other classical dances. Sattriya was born in the Vaishnav monasteries of Assam called Satras. The Vaishnav monasteries were established from the 15th century onwards. They came into being with the Vaishnav Bhakti movement coming to Assam. This variant of the Bhakti movement, called Ekasarana Namadharam, was unique in many aspects, and yet, like many of the other Bhakti movements in India, it has aspects in common, including being Krishna-centric and being creatively oriented. The architect of this movement was Sriman Shankardev, born in 1449. He initiated this movement in reaction to the prevailing forms of religion the prevailing forms of religion in Assam of that time, which included some tantric practices, some Shiva oriented practices and Devi practices. He ensured that this form had a religio-cultural and social manifestation. Located at one of the largest migration crossroads of the world, Assam is actually a mosaic of many tribes and communities. You must understand that these tribes and communities came in from different parts of the world, some from the north, some from the east, some from the southeast. They made Assam their home, but they were often aligned against each other. So actually Assam was not an Eden, it was not an ethnic Eden. There were a lot of competition between the communities. From about the 13th century onwards, there was an attempt by the Ahom kings to integrate Assam's various territories and people. The Ahom reign begins in Assam in the year 1228. Now, the process of integration that the Ahoms attempted was complemented by the movement of the Neo-Vaishnavites, the Ekasarana Namadharam, who carried the Bhagavad in their hand and the message of Sriman Shankardev. As they travelled far and wide, proselytizing the various ethnic communities, the message was an egalitarian message. The message was a message of surrender of the self, of living a good life, of surrendering before Krishna. These new converts of the ethnic communities who joined the faith often required frequent reinforcement of the message, as they were low literates and neo-converts. And in recognition of this need, Sriman Shankardev created an audio-visual medium of transmission of the message via bhavnas or sacred plays. The word bhavna comes from the root of bhavna. Bhavnas are comparable to the uparupakas of the Natya Shastra, which are like dance dramas. Thus, bhavnas are theatrical presentations that incorporated dance, music, theatre. They conveyed the ideals of the Bhakti movement and had their stories drawn from the Vaishnav epics of the Mahabharata and Ramayana. The bhavnas written by Sriman Shankardev enjoy a very privileged status in Assamese literary society and literary life, and they go by the name of Ankiya Nats. They are written as plays without a break, as if in one act, and hence the name Ankiya. The Sutradhar connects the various segments that play out in the course of the performance without a break. So, right from the preliminaries of the play, the element of dance is part of the bhavna. Even the Sutradhari dances, as do all the characters, when they enter the performance, as they establish their character, as they war with each other or enact any other important scene. In the satras that number presently over 500, even though there were far more in earlier times, there actually exist 3 registers of dance. Those dances that are drawn from the theatrical bhavana tradition is the first register, and those that were part of the ritual worship are the large second register, which is further subdivided in 2. The ritual worship has 2 types. One is called the occasional service or the Naimitya Seva, that happened, for instance, on the tithis of the gurus, Sriman Shankardev, Madhavdev, or any other important saint. Even Satradhikars, who were deeply loved, have memorial days. Then there is what is called the Nitya Seva, or the daily services. This happens at various times in the course of the day. The term Seva itself suggests the agenda of the second and third register. Its performance was not enactment of an entertaining aspect of cultural life, but its performance was ritual and it was offered with a sense of surrender. This enactment is open to all monks, irrespective of whether they are greatly accomplished or just novices. So the Seva aspects happen like this. Everybody in the Satra participates. Then there are some dances, by the way, that are common to both categories, like the Jhumura and the Bahar dances, and some dances that don't fall in either of these categories, like the Chali dances, in the sense that they were created for a specific purpose but are not part of the dramatic core and can be performed as part of a specific memorial day connected to, say, the person who created that Chali. Thus, what is common to the registers of dance in Sattriya is the fact that the variant dances are treated separately and that they were all ensemble treatments other than the Sutradhar dance. The preliminary in a Satra is always the Gayan Bayan, that includes the Dhimalis. The Gayan Bayan is a group of monks who sing, do some hasta mudras, play the cymbals and the khols while dancing some elaborate tal patterns to choreographed formations. They sing the verses of the Dhimalis. Of the 12 Dhimalis, only one is performed before a bhavana. However, all 12 are danced on specific tithis. By performing on a regular basis at the time of the tithis, the vast repertoire of the Dhimalis is revised, refreshed and remembered, ensuring that there is no loss of creative content. The Gayan Bayan's presentation of the Dhimali is really the first sighting of dance in the dramatic repertoire of the Satras. In the Bhavana, only the Sutradhar performs individually, albeit to the musical accompaniment performed by the ensemble. The Sutradhar makes his appearance from behind a Yavanika or a curtain, much like the Terashila of Kathakali or even the curtain of Kuchipudi's Bhamakalapam. In the case of the Satra, this curtain is called the Ar Kapod. When this white cloth curtain drops, the Sutradhar does a distinctive pranam. That has been incorporated as the unisex and omnipotent pranam for the stage life of Sattriya as well. The initial part of the Sutradhar's dance is slow paced and is called the Saru Bhangi. Saru means little or lesser. After the Nandi Shlok, it becomes fast paced and then it is called the Bor Bhangi. He includes in this section the Bhatima and the Shlokar Nach, which is accompanied by elaborate footwork and Hast Mudras. Apart from this part of the dance of the Sutradhar that can be considered solo, no other dance moment is a solo moment. Even the Sutradhar doesn't stay solo again. In fact, the Sutradhar stays on stage throughout the performance of the play, directing it along the way with his comments and interventions. All dances that follow, even either in the form of a dialogue or as a group performance, even when a character enters supposedly solo, the presence of the Sutradhar and other dramatis personae around dilute the soloness of the dance. Yet, one of the most noticeable features of Sattriya today is that it has a double life, a Satra life and a stage life. In the Satras, things continue as before, although the institution is certainly going through poorer times with the numbers of dedicated monks decreasing rapidly. In its stage life, much has changed, its agenda, the practitioner profile and even the gender. That in the Satras the agenda is faith oriented is evident from the fact that the performances are enthusiastically greeted with cheers of Jai Dhwani, Jai Hari Bol, Jai Ram Bol. Today, the number of male dancers is far less than the female dancers. In the Satras, which was a male environment, especially in the case of the celibate Satras, the female roles were also played by the monks, as women were not allowed to dance this dance till about 60 years ago. Today, on stage, the monks dance only the male pieces, as the female pieces are danced by women dancers who have trained in this form. Apart from losing the female repertoire on the modern stage, the monks are additionally dealing with a unique binary as they perform in two contexts, the self-negating context of the Satra and the self-asserting context of the modern stage. The most important change is the fact that in most of the performances on stage, it is offered in a solo format. Sometimes it is presented on the modern stage in a group format as well, but this case sees the group format mostly in the nature of multiple reflections of a single dancing body. When the dances were performed in the Satras, they were performed in the context of the Bhavana or in the context of the ritual. The Bhavana excerpts had a prelude and a sequel, so they did not stand out in an item format. Also, it was located in the narrative of the Bhavana and not as a standalone piece. For instance, every character made an entry in dance, mostly in group, and with chalis and gaits selected in keeping with the character. Even the talas were linked to the characters that were being depicted. Yashoda and the gopis danced to Ektali, Narad to Tukani Tal, and the demons to the powerful Archta Tal. The Praveshar Nach of the key figures was associated with distinctive shlokas, as in the case of Gosai Praveshar Nach, the Ram Praveshar Nach, Gopi Praveshar Nach. Another type of dance that was very attractive was the Ras dance. Although Bhakti is the predominant rasa in the Satra, Sriman Shankardev himself introduced the Ras dance in his Ankya Nat called Keli Gopal, while Madhavdev introduced the Ras dance in Ras Jhumura. Certain Satras, especially the Onyati and the Dakhinpat Satra, both of which had a close association with the Ahom court, were well known for the Rasar Nach. In fact, in the 18th century, the Satradhikars of the two Satras, along with the then Satradhikar of the Garamur Satra, another one of the four Rajasahi Satras, created new plays that gave the Ras dance great prominence. Even today, at the time of the Sharad Purnima, these Satras come alive with the Ras. The Ras, as the name suggests, is the Radha Krishna Ras, or it's better, more precisely, the Krishna Gopika Ras, because Radha is present as one of the other Gopikas, but she doesn't have a unique position in Sattriya. One of the most popular dances in the repertoire of the Satras is the Yudhar Nas. These are war dances between important characters in the narrative of the Bhavanas. They have actions that are strident, attacking, using of the clubs, swinging it around, pulling out bows, pulling out arrows. The rhythms are simple, but imagine all these actions, sudden twists, turns, bendings, cries, dramatic stridings. all end up looking very intimidating, and it is hoped that they intimidate the opponent. The late night viewing audience seems to get energized whenever the Yudhar Nach comes on. Then there are dances that bear the same name as the plays created by Madhav Dev called Jhumuras. These are danced by monks, but in a curiously mixed costume that has the male turban or paguri on the head but a ghuri or skirt below. A similar dance from the cachet of Madhav Dev's creations is the Nadubhangi dance performed by the Friends of Krishna. He also created the Behar dances taken from his composition Bhojan Behar. Behar dances pertain to tales and the life of the young cowherd Krishna. Madhav Dev also has the distinction of creating the Chali dances, in which the monks dress like gopis and dance. The Chali dances or Sali dances, as they are called by the Assamese, were created in Barpeta Satra, but eventually the Kamlabari group of Satras, renowned for their dancing prowess, adopted them as well. Possibly the Sali dances were created as a result of the essential philosophy of Vaishnavism that sees all earthly souls as feminine, yearning for union with the Eternal One, the Param Purush. Given the fact that Madhav Dev was a celibate monk, this reading could be quite valid. Interestingly, according to history captured in the Satrar Buranjis or the chronicles of the Satras and the Charitaputhis, the biographies, one of the earliest problems that this faith, that was an ideology of resistance inasmuch as it was egalitarian and anti-establishment, had with the prevailing social order was an account of the performance of Sali dances, which were interpreted by those who opposed it as an example of the lascivious life led in the monasteries. Thus we saw how Madhav Dev enriched the dance life of the Satras. Apart from the salis that were created for performance in the Satras, there was a register of very artistic and beautiful salis that were created for the royal court as well, because by the 18th century the court and select Satras had come together closely, and the Ahom court was in any case attempting to control the growing popularity of this faith, which they felt was challenging the prevailing social order. This register of 4 chalis was called the Rajaghariya salis. Rajaghariya salis were unique inasmuch as the mnemonics sounded like those of the Pakhavaj, although the accompanying instrument continued to be the khol. Secondly, these were the only dances in which the dancers were allowed to wear ankle bells of some sort. The Rajaghariya chalis were remarkable for the stress on aesthetic beauty, grace and lyricism. In all the chali dances, the monks would wear a scarf-like headgear knotted under their chins. This is one of the distinctive visual elements of the monks performing chalis. All these dances, the salis, jhumuras, nadubhangis, the various intra-forms have been structured in the same manner. The first part is a pure dance section called Ramdani. The term Ramdani is important to decode. It gets its name from Ram. The utterance of the name Ram itself was supposed to give so much joy that the body danced in joy. Then there would be an interpretive section called Geet or Nach. The Geet or song in each case would come from an appropriate text to be found in the Satra literature. For instance, the Jhumuras and the Nadubhangis took from Madhav Dev's Jhumuras. The Sali dances would take from the Ankya Naths, and both could also take from the Borgeets of Shankardev. Thus, the essentially bhakti dominated sentiment was retained. Finally, at the end would come the Melanas portion, which was an elaboration of the pure dance. Odissi managed to revive itself as a neoclassical dance from small remnants by the revival and reconstructive process of Jayantika, under the aegis of which the gurus and the scholars conducted their essential experimentations, reformations and alterations, all of which happened before its recognition. And thus, the Jayantika process helped Odissi acquire a modernist exhibitory profile. In his article, The Exhibitory Order, Timothy Mitchell has identified three specific processes that precede the exhibition: aestheticization, cultural objectification, and the invention of tradition. All three were part of the early years of the revival of Odissi. In a peculiar twist of history, in the case of Sattriya, its repertoire is being worked on for the exhibitory order, as it were, on a stage life, mostly after its recognition. Even today, there is no fixity on what constitutes Sattriya's non-negotiable core. What complicates the matter more is the fact that it has a parallel, older and still existent sacred life. In its stage life, it needs the dance to be decontextualized. It needs its repertoire to be rearranged for a secular modernist relocation, and it needs its content to be organized in a manner comparable to the other dance forms and in a package attractive enough for contemporary, culturally divergent and non-familiar audiences. This has proved to be a big challenge as its content has been changing. It has been forced to follow practices of other forms, losing its unique distinctiveness as an organic and living tradition that had been unsullied by fractures and revivals. This constant search for the margam, what is the ideal way of presenting the repertoire, what should be included in the repertoire, what should be the order of the repertoire, these are all questions that Sattriya is dealing with now after its recognition. All this realignment has been happening in full public view, making for an unusual and living laboratory. The ritual performance had a strong repetitive quality to it that makes it mesmeric. Certain of the ritual performances cannot be taken out of the Satra. They are considered so highly ritualistic, so extremely sacred, that they cannot be performed in a non-sacred secular space. One of these dances is a beautiful dance called the Bor Pravesh Nritya. In this performance, multiple images of Krishna appear, resplendent in attire, dancing, and they move in a circle for hours, casting a spell. The repetitiveness has a value. It's like chanting. That's why you're told to do 108 times the same prayer. So this repetitiveness is very important. Regrettably, the Sattriya if it has only a stage life, many of these elements will be lost to us forever. The Bor Pravesh Nritya, for instance, can be seen even today only in the Satras. If the Satras were to disappear, there would be no Bor Pravesh Nritya. We would have lost a beautiful gem of the repertoire. It's important for you to notice that the teachers in the Sattriya traditions are called Adhyapaks and not Gurus, as in the rest of India, because in the Satras, only the founders of the faith, Sriman Shankardev and Madhavdev, are called Gurus. Now, the senior dancers admit that the stage version cannot have the same impact unless the selection of the repertoire is done astutely to reflect the innate richness of the form that plays out in an entire year and has so much to choose from, just such a large spectrum to choose from. The first to apply his mind in a systematic manner to the process of bringing the art from its rich caches located in the celibate monasteries onto a secular stage was the former celibate monk Raseswar Saikia Borbayan, starting with giving bowls to serve as mnemonics for the ground exercises called Mati Akharas, which constitute the basic vocabulary of the dance, which till then was done in silence. Raseswar Saikia made many other alterations and adjustments in the dance items to suit its staged life. He had been a monk at the Kamlabari Satra, where he had distinguished himself as a Borbayan, the senior Bayan, of great skill, and had been leading its troops. After leaving the Satra, he came to Guwahati and became the first monk from the celibate Satras to start a school which he called Sangeet Satra. Here he had begun applying himself to the process of adjusting the tradition to the demands of the modern stage in a small way, along with inputs he received from the great scholar Dr. Maheswar Nyog. He had been an advocate of national recognition along with Nyog. The most important part of his work would have been post the recognition, when the form would have been rapidly compelled to adapt to the secular stage. But regrettably, the Borbayan died just a few weeks before the recognition. However, what has been the trend for solo performances has been to choose either the male repertoire or the female repertoire for an evening's performance, because in the Satra there is a very clear gender divide. There are male dances and female dances because it has come from a narrative tradition. Sattriya has a clear gender divide in its repertoire, a completely different costume, completely different positioning and treatment. The basic stance alone changes from the Purush aura, which is wide-armed and with legs parted widely. You have the more gentle and narrower Prakriti aura. So this difference between male and female kinetics and movements is really very well chiseled in the Satras. Once the dancer has decided whether it's the male or the female role, and this choice is open on stage only really to female dancers, as the male dancers on stage only perform the Purusha repertoire, then the order is somewhat like this. They start with the Vandana and follow a particular margam, using the Ramdani or the pure dance, one of the intra forms, a Gitar Nach of another intra form, a Shlokar Nach, a Bhatima, a Borgeet and a Mela Lach, excerpted from different intra forms. So the independent items are almost always organized in this tripartite division of Ramdani, Gitornas and Melanas. So from any dance you can take first a Ramdani, from another dance form you take a Gitornas, from a third you take the Melanas, and so you sort of are able to reflect the richness of the repertoire. Raseswar Saikya's disciple, Sharadi Saikya, has presented several papers on this subject. She feels that there is need to string a garland rather than present a bouquet of gathered flowers from the garden of Sattriya. And she has been adhering to this format to showcase the maximum variety of the dance form while being respectful of the demands of time, space and expectations of contemporary audiences. However, there is still no fixed margam. However, the most satisfying performances are those in which Satra monks and a female dancer or female dancers perform together. This contains the best mix and allows for the widest and most divergent selection of the riches of the form. The presence of the Satra monks even permits for the inclusion of the impressive Gayan Bayan, which doesn't happen otherwise in a solo recital. It may also permit an episodic enactment of the bhavana, not the entire bhavana, but certain dramatic episodes which are well laden with dance. Bhavana and Gayan Bayan are never witnessed in the solo format on stage, and certainly never by a group of women dancers. And that performance of the Gayan Bayan and of the Bhavana is what takes the energy quotient of the performance to a totally different level and holds you riveted. Actually, with the solo format and the increasing number of women dancing, certain elements of the repertoire are actually being dropped at the training level itself. One casualty, for instance, has been the Mati Akharas. The Mati Akharas are these very demanding, acrobatic, yoga-oriented ground exercises. Few female dancers who practice Mati Akharas successfully manage to weave them into new choreographies drawn from the Sattriya tradition and literature, and find actually in the Mati Akharas some great scope for dramatic strings of movements to be woven in. The role of Dr. Jagannath Mahanta, the late Dr. Jagannath Mahanta, is well known in this respect. His work with Anvesa Mahanta on Putana and with Srijani Bhasva Mahanta in the solo rendering of the Madhav Dev song Soi Bone Banamali, in which the dancer depicts the sequence of Bakasur Vadh, is noteworthy. Regrettably, Dr. Jagannath Mahanta is no more, probably at the time when the style needs him most. But I think with just the example that he has left, the template that he has left behind, much more work in this direction is possible. I hope I have been able to contextualize some of the aspects of Sattriya dance and put before you some of the challenges, some of its strengths, weaknesses, some of the most interesting ways, creative ways in which it is getting around its dual life of living in the satras even today and living on stage as a performance art form. Thank you so much for paying attention.